Hello, this is the Knit Up and Die episode live too. Hopefully everybody will be able to join. Otherwise, this is going to be kind of a strange episode simply because the live episodes are driven by you. And whenever I have a live episode, that gives us the opportunity to have a live streaming chat where I can see your information, your questions, and I can answer you on the fly. So I'm hoping people join. And there is Nancy. Hi. Yay. Oh, this is cool. I love doing the lives. They're so much fun simply because we have the interaction that we don't have when I get to film. Hey, Leanne. Hi. Alabama. Woo. This morning was a struggle. I was setting up to do the live. Actually, I was running around and doing errands and I was getting ready to do the live, and I knew that I had about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and my laptop decided to do a force update. It's at about 4%. So there was a giant panic, and I ran around and finally just gave up. I knew that my options were to reschedule or to use our hinky old laptop that my husband uses when he researches his motorcycle parts and repairs. And I got lucky. I was able to pull YouTube up on it still. It's still a little not great, and really struggled to get sound on it. I could not get sound. I'm hoping you guys can hear me okay. I finally had to plug in a microphone, and I've done about 12 sound tests before I could hear me, and I have my sound all the way up. So I'm really hoping you guys can hear me. If you can't, I'm sorry. I did everything I could. Good morning, Rachel. Hi. Oh, this is so cool. Oh, good. Ah, yeah, computers are awful. I'm glad you guys can hear me. Computers are really awful. When they work, they're wonderful. When they don't work, and I have been dealing with IT and computer tech now for way longer than I should admit to. I just realized the other day that I designed my first website in 1994, and that was a very long time ago. That was a very long time ago, and just have been dealing with stress of crash computers and technology for all these years, and I'm still not good at it. I still go into panic mode and hate that. Hate that. So workarounds are good. Well, all right. So what have I been doing this week? I finished a pair of socks. Yay. I got my, let's see if I can pull them out. I got my Lost in Space socks done. The colors on this camera are horrible. You're not going to be able to see them. This was the pair of socks that I was knitting from my sock blank. This is all that remains of my sock blank. Not a lot. I loved it. I loved working with the colors. I had so much fun. It's just fascinating when you're knitting along with it to be unraveling it and to see how that translates out to stitches in the round. And I think they are fun and just beautiful. I'm very excited about them. It's interesting that the colors that pick up by this camera are so muted and so flat that you can actually see the stitch pattern in this busy pattern. Hi, Betty. Yay. Thank you guys for joining me. I do really appreciate it. I'm hoping to be able to do at least one live a month. I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit to make sure that I can get a time frame that works for everybody. And I do have people in Australia who want to be able to participate, and I've got people in England who want to participate, and Sweden and Finland, and of course North America. And it's really hard to hit all the time zones. It's really hard to hit all the time zones. And then in some cases, I'm even hitting a dateline, and that's a little bit of a juggle when I say Tuesday, but it's actually Wednesday. I'm not good at that. I get lost just changing time zones going across the country. Anyway, this is my Lost in Space socks. I don't know that that pattern name is going to stick, but this pattern is going to be written up and it is going to be an exclusive pattern for my patrons. There will be hopefully a better sample photo that shows the stitch pattern better because this yarn really was not a good pairing for the pattern and for the stitch. It just doesn't work. They hide. They're fun, they're lovely, but it doesn't show off the stitches. So it is what it is. We'll work with it going forward. Oh my goodness. Does anybody have any questions for me today? I've got a bunch of other projects coming up. I did launch kind of a cheat photo last night on Instagram. I should be working on my 3-color farmhouse. I was so tired last night that I just decided to pick up yarn and start working on another design that's been puttering around for a while rather than trying to do something that was brain heavy. Work just sucks the life out of me. So I don't always have concentration skills after work to be working on things that require a lot of heavy processor thought. So I'll often just knit something easy. Last weekend, I believe it was, I sat down with some graph paper and I started to kind of doodle out a new design. And so I put it on the needles and I started knitting it up. It's new, it's shiny, it's cute, it's fun. It's not what I'm supposed to be doing, and I get all kinds of temptation dragging me away. Oh, good. That was the question that I failed to answer last week. Hi, Wayne. Hi, Charlotte. So I remember one from last time. Opinion on single ply yarns and their uses. Okay. I love single ply yarns. I think they're beautiful. They have a tendency to have a little bit of a halo. They also bloom when you knit them. What is bloom? Bloom is that it's a single group of fibers rather than several groups of fibers that have been twisted together. It's one grouping of fibers and it's been spun very tightly so that it's all twisted together and it won't separate or break. When you knit with it and then you wash it and you block it, that twist comes out a little bit. The natural action of knitting will untwist the yarn slightly. Uh, Anybody who's ever knit with applied yarn and had it start splitting on them, that's your yarn untwisting slightly and you're getting between the plies when it splits. Single ply yarns, once you're all done with it, the bloom is an expansion of the fibers. That twist has it all nice and tight. When you untwist it slightly, it blooms, it grows slightly. So that can throw off your gauge a little bit. Where all of a sudden the yarn gains air and it acts like a bigger yarn than it is gauged to. I see it all the time when I dye my single ply yarns because it's a nice tight line. And then after I've added water to it and dye to it and I've fluffed it all out and spun it dry and air dried it, the fibers opened up a little bit. And what looked like a really fine fingering weight is suddenly looking like a heavier finger weight. Once you knit with it, it gets even bigger. That is the beauty of working with the single ply yarn for, say, this, is it gets a little bit bigger and it makes it look a little bit more rustic rather than linen. Linen has a tendency to stay tighter twisted rather than wool, which aerates and blooms. Does that make sense? I love it for sweaters. I love it for hats. I'm not a big fan of using it for anything that's going to have a lot of wear. And by wear, I mean socks or mittens, anything that's going to see a lot of friction. Because it's not plied, it's not really protected by the fibers around it, and it's more likely to felt. Felting is all well and fine if you intend to felt. Felting is not well and fine if you're looking for stitch definition and for lace and drape. It's beautiful in lace shawls. You will always see me work with a little bit more open gauge initially if I'm using a single ply, because that bloom is going to make it look like a tighter gauge later on. I also, when I work with single plies, make sure that I block aggressively. So I'm really, really stretching it out to accommodate that bloom and to make sure that there's still the lace, still the drape, still the air in there. I just lost my entire chat feed. I'm hoping I didn't lose you guys as well. Oh, there you are again. Single ply yarn can make your projects twist. Wayne, that's a great observation. That is a biasing that happens. And ha 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 ha, that's because you're twisting it when you knit in the same direction that it is already twisted in. If you were to change your action and wrap in the opposite direction, you would find that it would undo that and you'd get a little bit more splitty. Because you're twisting in the same direction that the yarn is spun in, you're not going to have splits, and you're going to have a really nice tightly bound yarn that is not likely to felt, that is not likely to come undone. Relaxing that is going to be a trick for you to prevent that bias from pulling. The best thing that I can suggest for relaxing that so that it doesn't bias and it doesn't angle out on you is to use a nice conditioner when you wash it. Find a nice hair conditioner that is designed specifically for dyed hair and let it soak in that. Whip that right in with your soap and your water and let the project soak in that. It's still going to be twisted, but it's going to be a little bit happier about being twisted and a little bit less likely to bias over. Leanne, you're right. When you're working with a single ply, because it isn't protected by plies holding hands, that feltability is much, much higher. And with feltability also comes pilling. Pilling can happen a lot. I have a beautiful single yarn that I bought. I think it's a Malabrigo. I bought it probably 10 years ago. I started to knit a sweater with it, and I didn't get far before, even while I was still working on the project, it started to pill, and I was not happy with that. I knew that if it was pilling before I could even complete knitting it, that there was no way I was going to be able to wear that and be happy with it. Rip that all back and the yarn sits. I simply have not found a good project for it since, and I have a sweater quantity of it that will not become a pilling sweater. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I guess it could be a really giant heavyweight shawl. I don't know. Sonia, hi. Yay. I'm so glad you were able to join. And you and I need to talk. We need to sort out when we can physically sit down and knit together again. Linda from Maine. Hi, Linda. We have several Mainers here today. The silk wool blend in a single will not pill quite so badly, and that's because of its content. The silk actually is a beautiful binding agent. It is a very, very strong fiber, and if it's well plied into the yarn, if it's well blended in so that it's not, so you've got silk and wool together and spun rather than silk and bits of wool and silk and bits of wool. When it's all together really nice, the silk actually protects the wool and it prevents it from doing some of the pilling and some of the felting. Silk does not felt well. Ooh, September, great. That'll be so cool, Sonia. We do need to make sure that we get together. What areas of Maine are being represented today? I know I've got Midwestern Maine. Linda, whereabouts are you? Hey, Wayne, I wanted to touch base with you. You had a fantastic question this week, and I'm so sorry I haven't had a chance to email you back yet. Wayne asked about the various bases. You see all these podcasts, you see all these dyers, and we're talking about, oh, this yarn is on my Mosh Monkey base. What does that mean? What is this base? And where is this information coming from? How do we know that this designer's Mosh Monkey is that designer's unicorn, is that designer's sock? That's a really icky question. So we all have different suppliers that we get our bases from. And when we get our bases from these suppliers, they often have incredibly creative names like 37062. I love my 37062. The 37062, which is memorable for me, is not memorable for everybody else. And if you're buying yarn from me, you want to make sure that you're getting multiple skeins of the same color on the same base. Or you want to make sure that you're pairing bases or whatever's happening. We need a good way to convey what base we're using to you. And sometimes the content isn't enough. I have, let's see if I can grab one. I'm going to lunge. I'll be right back. Oh, we're in tight quarters here, folks. So I have two bases right here. Both of these bases, and you're not going to be able to see them very well, both of these bases have the exact same content. I have Tap Monkey here, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And I have Mosh Monkey, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. One of these is I got to stare at it with old lady glasses. One of these is a 4-ply. One of these is a 2-ply. And if you look carefully, you can see that this one has a nice smooth character to the yarn, and this one has kind of a, I don't even know how to say it, almost a ridging that looks like it's happening there. That ridging is you're able to see each of the plies. They're the same weight, but this one has 4 fine plies spun together, and this one has 2 heavier plies spun together. And those plies are physically visible in there. You can see each of the plies. Whereas this one, I've got to make sure that I've got my old lady glasses on and I stare really, really close. It's about texture. Exactly, Nancy. It's about texture. It's about what kind of stitch definition you're looking for. This one physically has a lot of texture in it simply because of the airspace between the plies. And it actually bumps up your stitch definition. It makes each stitch that much more visible. Whereas this one, the stitches are all going to kind of marry together and make a nice smooth fabric. Texture, definition. We have all these crazy, horrible base names that are very confusing, and it's difficult for us to say 3206A versus 3206, whatever. So we will often develop a base naming system so that we can keep our yarns straight and so that our buyers can keep our yarns straight as well. The problem in that lies with every dyer sets up their own base names. And when we set up our own base names, we cause confusion between others who are looking at, say, I really like Jessica's Tap Monkey, but I want to pair it with Southern Colonial's, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of your base right now, Leanne. Ask us, talk to us. Those of us that are in tight communication with each other, dyers that work together, we can compare behind the scenes and let you know that these are the same base. Sometimes we can just look at them. We can look at the yardage. Sometimes the yardage and the makeup is enough that we can sort out and say, yes, those are the same base. Sometimes you can compare and sort that out. But certainly ask us. We will figure it out. Magnolia sock. Brilliant. You're right there with it. So They're arbitrary, Wayne. They're very arbitrary. And we try to do clever naming so that you recognize that all of hers are mythical creatures, all of hers are trees or plants from the southeast. All of mine are dance steps. My monkey's a very happy monkey and he dances. Um, it's not helpful. It's not a great naming system. It's what we got. It's what we've got. But talk to us. We are always happy to sort that out for you and get that figured out. And this, I've been flashing this yarn at you. I'm gonna hold up a couple of them. The colors are going to lie to you on your screen. Like I said, this is a horrible camera. It is really not picking up colors well. So it's kind of a spoiler alert. This is this month's Patreon color. The color is called Myrtle. It reminds me of creeping myrtle plants in the shade. There's never really a true green that you see. You see a lot of teals and purples and little bits of cream, and I think it's just lovely. This was done with a number of different techniques. I'm going to see if I've got a skein here I can spin out for you. It does have some Grandpa Cook blue to it, yes. There's a little bit of what we call Grandpa Cook blue. It is a slate gray blue. So this was done with multiple techniques. I dyed this first with a resist technique where I had all the yarns twisted and I threw them in a pot with a deep teal. Then I untwisted them and I added to it I have to look at my color line here. I added to it a slate blue gray. And then I pulled the whole skein out and I did a dip dye back in to create a gradient with the purple. And it has so many tones and so many layers. There are colors veiled in. So we have everything from a navy to a kind of a light violet off to a teal, and there is still some cream in there. I love it. I think it's really beautiful. It was kind of an accident that it's similar to last month's Patreon yarn. I was playing and I layered colors together and I got this all developed for you guys. And then I went, wait a minute, I think that looks very much like the other one. They will beautifully, if you're doing any of the fade projects, work together. So show off my great big basket full of these yarns. So it looks like we're having a little bit of glitch. I know that there were a number of cable providers and internet providers that had some outages this past in the past 24 hours. There was a cable cut in the Comcast network, and that affected a number of other providers. I'm really sorry if we're jumpy. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about kind of nothing until people think that we're back streaming well again. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for the update. That was a whole basket of happy. So this is this month's Patreon yarn. And I just love the colors. It could be my streaming as well. I know on the weekends things are a little weird with our streaming, especially in the summer weekends, just because everybody's poolside and streaming. Eve, hi! Oh gosh, what time is it for you? It's got to be some crazy time, or late afternoon. Let's see. Let me think about this. You're, I think, 7 hours off from me, so it should be late afternoon. Oh, good, Wayne. Wayne, did I answer your question a little bit about those bases? I know it's crazy confusing and it's not great information for you. Sonia, thank you. That basket is actually a product from Harbor House Baskets. Oh, sorry. Um, that is these beautiful calico colored coil baskets. I love them. I use them as project bins all around my house. I have some small ones that I keep my stitch markers and my little tools in on my side table. They're fabulous. In fact, you guys have seen my How to Eat an Elephant blanket. That's in one of the giant ones that Harbor House sells. They are fantastic. I love them. Wayne, is there anything I can do to clarify that for you? 1725. So coming up on 5:30. Tea time, right? I think that's. So the 3-color farmhouse shawl is coming. I'm still aiming to get that done by September 1st as part of the design along. Wayne, I wanted to send you links as well. The design along is under the Knit Up and Dye group, and there is a thread there that's specific to the design along. I will send you a link. I am so sorry. I have not been clear about that. The 3-color shawl is a little bit delayed just because I had to do a stitch count. So I sat down, I did some math, and I figured out every single stitch, how many stitches I actually worked in the 2-color shawl. And I had to do some creative math to figure out how many stitches per gram of yarn so that I knew what yardage was used and how I could shift the percentages to slide in a 3rd color. I want to make the best use possible of the yarn. If we're going to have 3 colors, I want to make sure we're using all 3 colors and that we're using as much of the quantity as possible. I don't want to leave you with, well, we used 5 grams out of one color and now you're stuck with 95 grams of something. I want to make sure that we're really monopolizing the yarn as much as possible. So I figured out 250 stitches per gram. It's actually like 254. And now I'm looking at how I want to incorporate the 3rd color and the stripes, which will then be remathed, and I'll figure out how many stitches that's going to require and whether or not I'm still within the limitations of the yardage. Ultimately, I want to stay about 5 grams under a 400 yard skein, which means I'm aiming for 95 grams with 250 stitches per gram. Yes, there's a lot of math. As long as you know what your cast on is and you know what your consistent increase rate is, that math is not difficult. It's a matter of just counting how many rows of what color and then sorting out where they land and what their stitch count is. For the 2-color farmhouse shawl, it is a very, very detailed pattern. I have it worked out so that it is clean and easy to use for the knitter. Sonia, enjoy your breakfast. Have a great time, and we will talk soon. So with the farmhouse shawl, I have it set up so we actually have tick boxes. And for each tick box, it tells you what colors and how many stitches you're going to end up with. Oh no, math is so important, Betty Ann. You have no idea if you want to design how well you do now. I am so grateful that I had a love of algebra, that I really was interested in it, that I did 4 years of algebra. I could not stand calculus. And then in college, I did college level algebra as well. And I'm so glad I did because finding X is everything when you're trying to sort out patterns. Would it be able to use the basic 2-color shawl and add the 4th panel for a poncho? Absolutely. So Leanne, when you work the pattern, if you wanted to turn this into a poncho, it's easy. So the pattern, as you can see, is 3 panels. It has a 3-stitch border here, and it has a single stitch spine at each of the increased lines. There's 1 stitch that's consistent down that. Instead of working the 3-stitch edge, you would set it up in the round, and you would add this, you would add the length of this again for the fourth one, and never count the 3 in here, but instead just do spines at each of those points and close it up. I probably lost you with that. It would be easy to do. It is possible to do. Any triangular shawl, you just double it. With this, you're just adding one more of the panel. And the panel is pretty straightforward. This is actually really, really simple because you're really just concerned with stripes. I didn't confuse, or I didn't lose you, or I didn't make it worse. So it's really about keeping track of the stripes, and as long as your stitch count makes sense when you get to this, as long as it matches per panel this, you're good to just do this. It'll all work out. The math is all there. As for the final edge lace, the rule on that one is a multiple of 4 plus 1. It does have the 6 stitch count included in it. With the 6 stitches for the edge. Oh, good. Okay. So you've got 3 on either side. That equals 6. 6 is a multiple of 4 plus 2. We're looking for a multiple of 4 plus 1. So when you pull it out, I think you're going to end up with 2 rows shy on the final edge lace. And as long as that's in the back, nobody will ever see that that peak is short by those 2 rows. You could cheat it. Or in your final stripe, if you do 1 increase on opposing corners, you could cheat that stitch up, and then the points would count all the way around. I would have to check the math on that, but I'm pretty sure that you'd be able to cheat that by doing 1 more increase in that final round in 2 places, and then you'd be back up to the same stitch count. You'd be meeting the multiple of 4 plus 1 rule again. It all makes sense when I'm talking about it in terms of knitting, but if I were talking about it in terms of ohms for car batteries, we had to deal with a dead battery this morning, I'd be lost. It's funny how we can compartmentalize things in our lives, where I can double and triple a dye recipe, I can double and triple a cooking recipe, I can move stitches around in my head, and I can make something that's flat 3-dimensional. But as soon as I have to apply numbers to something else, nah, doesn't work so well. It's quiet. I'm sorry. Hi from Virginia, Linda. Hey, great to see you. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad you were able to pop in. I wanted to thank everybody again. The emails and the messages that I got over the past couple weeks meant everything to me. I am doing much better. My mental health is a lot better. And a lot of that is simply knowing that I'm not alone, that everybody has had life experiences, sometimes a lot worse than what I've been through. Sometimes, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and everybody's life experience, no matter how harsh, how horrible, or how incidental, it's about how we process it. And the mountain in front of us is a mountain, regardless of whether somebody else thinks it's a hill or somebody else thinks it's Everest. And when you're looking at it and it's your Mount Everest, knowing that other people have made it up over their own Mount Everests is everything. And it really helped. You guys were wonderful and generous, and I thank all of you so much for sharing your stories and for being so kind to me. How do I decide which of my dye techniques to use for the result I want? A lot of playing, a lot of playing. So Each of my dye techniques I developed by playing with it and really learning how each one would affect the yarn. If I wanted to have blank spaces that I could work with, I made sure that I created blank spaces. And it was about how much of a blank space do I want? Do I need a big canvas to do, say, sprinkles on? Or do I need a smaller canvas so that the sprinkles end up over just a few stitches? Simply by playing techniques and knowing how those techniques work with my initial samples is how I go forward. Often I'm not going forward with a yarn. I'm not designing a yarn with an end result in mind. Often I'm still playing, I'm still enjoying, and just doing whatever I feel like at that time. I do get custom orders. I had a custom order this past week for a bride. Elaine is getting married, and Elaine wanted to be sure that she incorporated colors from her wedding dress as well as from what her groom was wearing. And she had been to several yarn stores and she looked at yarns and just wasn't finding the yarn she wanted. So I was tasked with, I want multiple shades of red, so I don't need to be concerned whether or not it's going to match my dress. And I need a navy from this yarn that you've already done before. The navy from this yarn that I've done before, that's easy. I pull that recipe, I know what I used to make that navy and how I applied it. But the multiple shades of red, that's where all of a sudden I'm in trouble. And I need to pull multiple recipes of red and talk to her about what other yarns have you seen my reds in? Okay, it's this recipe and this recipe and this recipe. And then I have to try and figure out what technique I can use to incorporate an area with all of the scattered reds and be able to apply the blue technique that I used here. So it's really about having a strong memory for what the end results were for the techniques that I've used in the past. It's a very, very creative process. It's not always science. And even with this, I wasn't sure that I was going to get the result that I wanted. I'm not yet sure it's the result she was looking for. They shipped out this morning. It's really just playing and being accepting of the magic that happens in the pot. Eve, you are right. It's whatever is the worst thing that happened to you is the worst thing that's happened. Um, Short tutorials of stitches and demos of stitches. That is something that's coming up. It is something that's in the works. It is part of the Patreon package where there's going to be a lot of exclusive content for my patrons, where I'm going to do more and more of my demos. I have a number of demos out there that are in my regular podcast for things such as the Chinese waitress cast on. I'm looking to do a lot more of these mini demos so that we have a resource of readily attainable glossary of stuff so that you can pop in and pull the demo for this, the demo for that, and make them easy to get to and easy to find. Whereas right now, if you're looking for one of my demos, you got to kind of dig through all of my podcasts. I am also looking to, when I have time, do an index of all of my podcasts, which is starting to get heady. There's 70, I think this is technically 75 podcasts that I need to sit down and kind of index out so people can find resources quickly. How do I decide which colors I want to use, especially if I'm layering or things like that? Ooh, that one's a tough one. I often have a general theme in mind. Often it's inspired by a book that I read or something I've seen online or even just like memories of the beach or something. So I'll have a general color palette in mind. The problem with that is when you start layering colors, you're playing with chemistry. And there are some colors that will have really unexpected results when you mix them with other colors. For example, you can apply a beautiful, rich, burnt orange, and you can apply a teal And when those two overlay, you get a really strange copper. I don't know why. Yellow and purple will actually bleed together and make a gold. It's having kind of a memory of what happens. I know a number of dyers that pre-test every single color and they lay everything out, and they have a book of color where they have little mini samples of how all the colors lay out and what happens when they lay over each other. I don't have the time or finances to sit down and create a book of color like that. It's a massive undertaking to really play with every color in the rainbow and how the chemistry lays out and become other colors. Water amounts are vitally important. It's whether you want the dye to move or not. Acidity is vitally important, whether you want the dye to strike very fast or whether you want it to bleed over each other. I look at the color wheel. I do look at what colors work together, whether they're tertiary colors, primary colors, secondary colors, whether they complement, whether they are contrasting. I've had some that should have been absolutely beautiful that when they hit the dye together were horrible. I have, I'm going to do another lunge, and I'm going to grab a skein of yarn that I'm not entirely happy with. And we're going to look at those colors and talk about that. And I'll talk about notes about my recipes in just a second. Oh, let's see if we can grab this. Okay. Sorry, guys, bouncing around all over the place. Meh. It's pretty enough. There's a mauve in here. There's a pink in here. There's a pale lavendery gray purple in here. It's a pretty yarn. When I look at it objectively and I see this on the shelf, I think, oh, these are pretty. They're muted, dusty pinks and a pink. I'm disappointed in this yarn because it's not what it was supposed to be. This is the result. This weird silvery lavender purple is the result of a pistachio green and the pink that you see. I wanted to have a very floral color. I wanted to have a light green. I wanted to have beautiful pinks in here. And unfortunately, when the green hit that pink, this chemistry happened and I got this pucey, dusty lavender tone. It's very pretty. They work together. It makes a nice color combination. It's not what I wanted. This is one of those I learned at skeins. This is a lab skein where I discovered that green and pink, if you let them touch, if you let them bleed over each other, become purple. Who knew? Sorry, I'm trying to read down through the list here. So what sort of notes do I take? Here's an outtake skein, Eve. So what kind of notes do I take? Let me grab a notebook so that I can see kind of what notes I take and give you an example. So what kind of notes I take? I have, let's see if there's my notes have become very abbreviated because I know what they mean. So I'm going to try and pull an older notebook. Actually, let's pull the refined notebook. So I keep different notes. I have my dye notebooks, which are ratty and tattered, and they've gotten wet and stained, and you can see there's like scribbles all over the place. And then I have my diary. And my diary is like a formalized, final, neatened version of my recipes, so that if I can't find it in those, I can find it in this, and I have a permanent record. This particular diary is a permanent record of yarns that I love, that are reproducible consistently, and that I would continue to dye. That down there includes things that I will never dye again, that were fails. I will mark fail right on it. But my recipes will have the pot that I used. They will have the amount of water that was in the pot with the yarn, because that's important. It's about how much flow and float that you have so that the dye can circulate around the yarn. I have the level that I had on my stove, whether it was set to a higher temperature or a lower temperature. Um, I've learned that the temperature doesn't matter so much as whether it gives me enough time to get the dyes all in and get them soaked up before I hit a boil. I don't want it to hit a full boil. I want it to hit a simmer, but I want that simmer to happen after all the dye has taken up, because I don't want, how do I express this? I want to be sure that the dye is fully exhausted before I start to heat set it. Otherwise, you end up with dye in the pot that you didn't get fully soaked in, and then it's harder to reproduce it. I have how the yarn is in the pot or the pan if I'm using that technique, whether it's tightly twisted, whether it's simply folded, whether it's folded in half or quarter, because that is how much resist there is and how the dye is going to be able to get around that particular skein. I have the amount of acid that I have loaded to it, whether it's a quarter cup of vinegar or it's a teaspoon plus a tablespoon of citric acid, whether it's a full cup of vinegar. The acidity level affects how fast the take-up is. If you have lower acidity, you're giving the fiber more time to absorb the dye all the way in all the layers. If you have high acidity, the dye actually kind of does like a burn on the outside, and you will see a halo of color with a core color underneath. Then I have how I applied the dye to the pot, whether it was a strong center pour where I just dumped it in and that way it went straight to the bottom and then curled up the sides and hit everything, or whether I had the yarn pulled back and I poured it into the void and let it slowly bleed in like I do with a veil pour, or whether I had the yarn in and I did a circular wall pour or even a half circular if I'm adding a couple of different colors. That tells me where I applied it. That tells me how I applied it. And then how long it took for it to heat set at that temperature so that I have an idea how well that worked or what. Oh, there are more dye fails. There are more dye fails. It's very hard, specifically for something like this. I know people who will love this yarn. They will think that is just the prettiest thing they've ever seen. It's hard for me to look past what I wanted it to be to see the beauty that it is. That's difficult because I have a personal disappointment attached to it. That energy is kind of written onto this, and I have to let this sit on a shelf and bake for a while before I can release my disappointment and look at it for what it is and appreciate it for what it is. Just because it's not your taste doesn't mean it's not somebody else's taste. One man's trash is another man's treasure. And there is somebody out there who looks at this and they see gold, whereas I look at it and I see tin. I give it time to lose its tin so I can see the gold. I hope people understand what I'm saying by that. Often, if it's something that I was tinkering with, and here's where things get difficult. If you're taking notes and you're dyeing, and you get to a point with the yarn where you're like, it's not what I wanted. Maybe it'll get better if I do this. And you start throwing other stuff into the pot. It's kind of like when you're making soup. You're making soup and it's not salty enough. So you add a little bit of salt. And then you taste it again and you go, it doesn't have any mid note. And you throw in some mustard. And all of a sudden you end up with a little bit of flavor. And then you go, this would be better if I added just a little bit more chicken stock. You forget to notate those things. And eventually you get the perfect soup, but you're never going to be able to make that recipe again quite the same way because you didn't notate those little changes that you did. The same thing can happen with when we're dyeing our yarn, where I get to a certain point with this and I went, it's not what I wanted. Okay. Am I going to do a veil in navy? If I do a veil in navy, I'm going to end up with some dark spots. It's going to overwrite this bright pink. Yeah, I could do it. But then if I love it, I have to recreate that again. The longer, more complicated your recipes are, the harder they are to recreate. And there comes a point where you have to either take really, really good notes for every one of those little adjustments that you do so that you can redo all those little adjustments in the future, or you just say, I'm going to set this on the shelf until I can appreciate it. And this is going to be a wonderful colorway someday for somebody. Um, Oops happens. Oops can be beautiful. Oops can be miserable. There are some that I did a lot of little edits on that turned to muck, and they will never see the light of day outside of my studio. It happens. It happens. And as much as there's a piece of me that wants to beat myself up for those failures, that's how I learned what my techniques are. And that's how I learned what my techniques do. And that's how I learned how this color doesn't overlay with that color. I now know that pistachio and pink make purple. And this purple, if I ever want to create it, is made that way. I do have photos of all my yarns, and I photo them often with their name tag on so that I can see that name in the photo. It's a good quick reference for me so that I know where to go with that. Sorry, I'm just catching up. I need a dictaphone. Yes, I'm quite sure that I have drowned everybody in information. Clearly, I'm passionate about what I do. As you know, none of this is scripted. And so it's coming right straight from the heart, right straight from the brain, and you're getting a true download of everything. I am really good about sharing my information about how I do stuff. I think it's important. If we don't share how we do things, if we don't share information about our products, about our chemistry, we can't grow as artists, and we should all be growing as a community together and making beautiful, wonderful art rather than all stumbling around with starting blocks. Thank you, Betty. I do try really hard. I try to think of it very much like cumulative community learning. Oh, yes, that would be fabulous. Having a recording of my stuff, having a dictaphone there, so that I don't have to. My notebooks get splashed with dye. They are wet. I have gloves on. I have pens and paper out. I have dye splashing on the notebooks. I have water dripping off my gloves into the notebooks. They are a tatty mess. Having something that could just stream, having like Dragon Natural speaking on my computer, taking notes for me would be fabulous. I envy you, Betty. Transcription is not easy. I wish that we had better transcription in the medical practice that I'm working in, because some of the transcription that comes across through the computer system is hysterical. Uh, we did a hysterectomy on a man the other day. I work in an orthopedics practice. I don't think that that was quite what the doctor said. And interestingly enough, he did it in the office in a 7-minute visit. So I don't think that's what happened. And the digital ones have a tendency to give us bad enough information that it causes coding problems because some of it is just connected. Wayne, you are a love. Please go and get some rest. Thank you so much. I will be in touch with you with your other questions. I think I have some really good news for you about your wish list there. And you rest and you take care. Thank you so much for joining me, Wayne. Yeah, I don't think she was having a vasectomy. I'm guessing on that one. Wayne, I'll try and send you that email today. I had meant to send that this morning, and my computer is up to 12% updated now. Yeah, we're an hour in. That's wrong. Oh, sorry, just tucking stuff out of the way. Did anybody have any other questions for me? Anything else I could answer? And Betty Ann, you're irreplaceable, whether you're transcribing or just being. Okay, the test knit yarns, I'm looking across at the table over there. They are almost ready. I need to label them. I'm waiting for a couple of people to get back to me with their selections, and then I will have the test knit yarns ready to go out. I'm going to probably invoice everybody via PayPal for those. Um, and then they should ship. I'm hoping next weekend they'll ship. We'll see where that's going. I kind of need to finish the pattern. I'm having a bit of a jostle with the pattern. Linda, you are very welcome. I will always be as generous as possible with the knowledge. Uh, Outside of outright sharing recipes, I will always give you any answer to any question. I'm excited too, Betty Ann. One of the problems I'm having with the final write-up of the pattern is that I do want to offer charts in the pattern. Charts are just a really easy way to convey the simple lace, and they can be done in a very compressed area. There's this unwritten rule about your patterns that if you offer charts, your charts need to be consistent, in that if you offer a chart that has both right and wrong side rows in it, all of your charts should have the same format, that they should have right and wrong side rows in them. However, to chart the lace in the body of the shawl, there is not need to show you the wrong side rows. It just takes up space and it's a simple instruction, purl back. However, the lace edge chart, it is necessary to show you the right and the wrong side rows of that lace. And I'm fighting with some industry standards. I have this sense that I need to follow the rule and show you right and wrong side rows of both charts, but I don't want to. And I'm at that point where I'm going to break the rules and I'm going to do it my own way. The reason for that is I know in my heart of hearts, as a teacher, as a pattern writer, that giving you less information in the initial chart rather than drowning you in excess information that's not necessary is going to be better, and it's going to be easier to work. And that giving you the proper information in the edge chart to achieve that result is the right way to do that. So I'm going to do it my way. Where's Sinatra when you need him? It does. It makes the most sense. I have had 2 nights of not good sleep. And I hate to say I lost sleep over this, but I did. And it wasn't intentional. It wasn't that I was surface worrying about it. It's that I do a lot of pattern problem solving in my sleep. It'll be sitting in that back compartment that you don't think about, and you fall asleep, and then your brain starts to process and problem solve on that. And I have written this pattern out, I think, probably 20 times in my head. I have everything except those charts loaded to the pattern, and I'm cleaning up the instruction. I've done the chart work. I need to place them in there. Um, since when have you had any issues doing it your own way? Ah, lady. Every day of my life. There's the internal battle about whether or not, I think we all do this. I think we all do this. How will I be perceived? If I do it my own way, will I be judged? Will I be wrong? If I do it my own way and I am wrong, will I recover? Can I fix it? Can I undo it? Will I have burned bridges? There's always that self-doubt, even when I look confident and I convey that I'm doing it my own way. This is it. This is how that back process when I'm sleeping is all the gremlins sitting on my shoulder whispering at me. And I have worked very hard through years of therapy to flick those angry little gnomes off my shoulders and stop listening to the voices that judge me and stop listening to the voices that nudge me to be a sheeple and follow the rest of the herd. I'm getting better at it. And I think that's something that comes with age and experience. I think it's something that I often joke. I have a grandmother. I had a grandmother who definitively went her own way. I don't think I ever saw that woman follow anybody else unless they happened to get out of the building before her. And she is kind of a example. She is the bow ship in my fleet, in that the first thing that went on that woman's body was her filter, and that was about experience, and that was about embracing life, and that was I like to think that's what these things were about. And so I try to embrace my inner Marilyn at every opportunity and go my own way. I really do. I just lost my chat feed again. I hope that doesn't mean that I've lost you guys. I'm going to wait for it to refresh. I do see a lot of encouragement coming through. Bear with me just a minute. It should pop back up. It did last time. I hope I didn't lose everybody. It looks like you're all still there. Either way, I am learning to forge my own path with less and less doubt, less and less self-questioning, and I'm having a lot more fun living like that. So we're going there. Don't be afraid of doing a podcast. So I knew I wanted to do a podcast. When I originally thought about doing a podcast, it was I had a friend who was moving across the country, and my original thought was that this was going to be more of a Skype between her and I, because I missed having my knit group and I missed having my knitting friends. And it wasn't something that she was gung ho about. It wasn't something that she was comfortable with or willing to engage in. And honestly, our schedules are such that it never would have happened. But I knew I wanted to do it. The podcast for me is really kind of a digital diary. Although I'm talking with you guys and I'm connecting with you guys, and you guys are so important to me, you're kind of like if your diary could write back to you or give you advice or give you an opinion or cheer you on. These things are really, they're diaries. And it's a diary of how I'm feeling at that time, or what I'm designing, or the direction I'm taking my business in, or just everything. They can be very personal. Y'all have seen me cry. They can be very professional, where I've talked about sales and promotions and things that I'm creating. They are whatever you want to make it. I don't have any fears that anybody is going to threaten my life, threaten my livelihood, threaten my safety, um, or impact me in any way negatively by me doing this. To date, I have had, I think, one negative Nelly that came out and said something to me, and that person made their statement and disappeared. The positive reinforcement that I've gotten through this, I've been doing this now for, we're coming up on, I think, 2 years. It has been so good for me as a person. It has been so good for me as a designer. It keeps me on track. It keeps me focused. It keeps me moving forward. It has been so good for me as fulfilling my need to teach. It has been brilliant for me as a dyer, because you're seeing my products and I'm getting them out to you, and you're having the opportunity to love them. So yes, it's an advertising tool. Absolutely. I freely admit that. More than that, it is a tool to keep me on track, both personally and professionally and mentally. I love it. When I don't do it, I have a sense of personal guilt. Not that I've let you down, but that I didn't do something that I enjoy. Um, it's not difficult. The hardest hurdle is the technology. I use free software that came with my Microsoft computer. The YouTube Live, you don't even need that. If your laptop has a camera and a microphone attached to it, and you can do a quick sample of your lives, you can launch every one of these live. Which reminds me, Eve, I missed your live episode and I am bummed about that. I did very much want to join your live episode. I was at work when it came up on my phone, and I wish I had the flexibility to say, peace out, boss. I'm going to go listen to a live podcast. But let me know when you're scheduled again next, and I will find a way. I will work around something. But like I said, the live podcast, you can stream them off your phones now, where you can actually sit there and hold up your cell phone and talk to it and have it come through like this. I don't know how the chat and the thread comes up in that, just because I haven't tried it. Would it be possible to show how I wash my knitting? Absolutely. In fact, I have, I'm trying to think. There was something. I have some product that I need to wash. I think I need to do a washing of my socks, and that would be a good one to demo. Absolutely, because most knitters have socks, and sweaters and such. Do I have a sweater that needs washing? I must. I do wear my knits a lot more between washings than I do a number of other articles of clothing. It's all about when something actually becomes dirty. I should probably show how I wash some of my like scarves and shawls as well, because they sort of need to be reblocked when you wash them. They can lose their block. Well, they do. They lose their blocking, and it's about getting that laid back out, especially if you receive something as a gift. When you knit a gift for someone, you wash it, you set it up so it's all perfect, so that when they open it, they have this beautiful item. And then the recipient, if they're not familiar with how to take care of that, if they're not familiar with the blocking or how the washing process works, they will wash it and they hold it back up and it's meh. And it loses all of the gift of love that was attached to it. And it's important to have that, be able to recreate that. So yes, absolutely. I should be taking notes, because I have so many different things I need to do with you guys. I will definitely, I need to sit down and restream my first live, and I need to restream this live so that I can pull notes from it. And thank you so much for asking the questions again that I missed last time about the plies. So wash knits, absolutely. And it's really not that different than when I wash it to block it, or when I wash the yarns themselves. When I dye my yarn, I've heat set it and I've let it cool down to like room temperature, or I've got the sink water at the same temperature the yarn is, whether that's hot or not. And then I'm blending in a good wool wash soap, and I'm blending in a conditioner. I always use a conditioner. This was a tip that my mother had gotten from another yarn producer or another knitter years ago. And at the time that I got the tip, I wasn't doing dyeing to this degree, and I didn't really know what the benefit was. As soon as I tried it, I got it. The bell went off, and I have used a conditioner in my yarns ever since. Whether I was washing a sweater or a scarf or a pair of socks, or it was using anything, I always make sure I use a conditioner now. It just makes the yarn its absolute best. Is it possible to wash the itch out of wool yarn? Yes and no. It depends on what your itch is. I did not knit with wool for years, avoided it for years, because I didn't understand what was itching me, what the problem was. Come to find out, I have an alpaca allergy. I can't touch yarn that has alpaca in it. I start to itch. And it was giving me the hat itch. Couldn't stand that. If I had a shawl that had any alpaca in it, I would rash here. And when I knit with it, I'd get red lines on my fingers, or blisters. I would literally blister on my palms. So I aggressively designed and knit only with acrylics. It took an education for me to figure out what was bothering me. And I was very, very fortunate that at my local yarn store, I worked with a spinner who knew all the different yarns, knew all the, not yarns, forgive me, all the different fibers. whether she was working with yak or silk or angora or merino versus, I'm trying to think of all the different other sheep. There's so many different sheep out there. So it really depends on the breed of sheep or the breed of animal that the fiber comes from. You could potentially have itch from a fiber allergy. You could have itch from an underwashed yarn. If that yarn has not been removed of its stray hay, guard hairs, if the guard hairs have been spun into it, which are the longer outside hairs, not the wool underneath, that can cause you an itch. And you'll see those when you're knitting. You'll see bits of straw sometimes. You will see the longer guard hairs are wiry and they have a tendency to stick out. You can pull those out as you're going along. It's a little bit tedious if you're knitting and there's a lot of guard hairs spun in to pull those out. But that fiber, because of its wiriness, can be pulled out and set aside, and it's not going to degrade your yarn overall. The other thing that can be in there is residual soaps that can be irritating, and the dye. That's where it gets a little tricky. Depending on the pH in your water will affect how much runoff you have when you wash your yarns. And even a fully set dyed yarn, you can get runoff with it depending on the pH of the water that you're washing it in. That can be really frustrating for people if they've bought a yarn that they love and the pH is just stripping the dye back out of it. But some dyes, especially darker colors, can be really, really irritating against your skin. They are chemicals, they are a granular item, they are trapped under a fine follicle, and they can make you itch. You can actually have a sensitivity or an allergic reaction to certain chemicals in the dyes, and a good wash with a good conditioner can protect you from that. With the shaker yarns, those are nice, rough yarns. I'm not sure what the breed is. I don't think the breed is listed on our labels for those shaker yarns. They're beautiful. The colors are delicate and lovely. They're really a breed meant for an outdoor garment, whether it's the outside of a mitten with a mitten liner in it or a hat. They would be a good outer garment, outer sweater versus a against the skin sweater. They benefit greatly from a long soak and from a conditioner. I have found that my shaker wools do soften up. They are spinning them pretty raw. They're not really refining that wool before they spin them. So you smell it and it has that sheepy smell in it. That sheepy smell is the lanolin. It's the grease. They're spinning the wool in the grease. And that tells me that there is still dirt trapped in there. There's hay trapped in there. There's guard hairs trapped in there. And that's giving it that rougher experience, that itchy experience. We can pull the guard hairs out. We can pull the hay out. And then a good long soaking wash in a lukewarm water with a quality wool wash and a nice quality conditioner. Heavy on the conditioner. I probably use 2-to-1 conditioner to soap. I am tempted, even with my shaker wools, to wash them first in Dawn to break up the lanolin, and then go back and wash them again in a wool wash with a conditioner. It'll break up the lanolin and the other fibers and dirt and stuff that's in there, which is lovely. That some people hear me talk about wool spun in the grease and they're like, ew, it's dirty, it's nasty, why would you do that? We do that because it creates a waterproof wool that is so insulating and so warm. It is perfect for outer garments, especially in cold environments. It's not good for warm environments and droppy lace, beautiful against your skin knits. But we can get it there by removing that leftover stuff that's protecting it and creating that waterproof barrier. I'm sorry, I rattled for like 20 minutes straight. Is that making sense? Am I being clear about what's happening there? That the softer the yarn, the more refined it is, or the finer cuticle in the fiber, or the smoother that it is. The thick, heavy outer stuff, Peruvian knits, they're beautiful. They make those great big, heavy knit jackets. They're in the grease, they smell sheepy, they're wonderful, they are itchy as all get out. And it's because it's got all that extra lanolin and fiber and guard hair and everything in it to make it that powerful outer garment. Eve, I forget that you're a spinner. Thank you for weighing in. Yes, absolutely. Relanolizing. There are a number of quality wool washes out there. If you look at the ingredients carefully, one of the things about a quality wool wash is that it includes lanolin. We want to add grease and oil back into our wool. If we do not keep it moisturized, naturally moisturized, it becomes brittle, it becomes fraying, it dries out. I have a number of yarns that are older in my stash that, in fact, I pulled some out this week when I was working on that new shawl design that I shouldn't be working on. Ooh, pretty. That if I were being a good monkey, I would skein that back up out of its and I would give it a nice soaking wash and relanolize it to rejuvenate that yarn. I'm too busy going, ooh, pretty. Find it now, are you sure? When you cake your yarns, if it's caked properly, it will not put pressure and strain on the yarn. However, once it's caked, it's nowhere near as easy to wash and care for. And if you keep it in the skein, you can go back and you can wash it again later and cake it when you use it. And that just gives you more opportunity to take care of your product. I struggle with grease. Oh, part of it is my aversion to wool. Because I thought I was allergic to wool for so long and I didn't realize that it was actually alpaca that I was allergic to, I grew an aversion to whenever I saw a yarn, I would immediately sniff it to see if it was in the grease or not because that told me what its content was. Um, I don't like the feeling of in the grease on my hands. It doesn't feel, when you say the word grease, you think of it as being slippery. For me, my impression about in the grease is that it's very waxy and I get sticky, and yeah, I don't like sticky. I don't like sticky. Slippery, I don't mind. Sticky bothers me. Probably from years of getting pine pitch on my hands and not being able to get it off with anything other than like an acetone or gasoline, and that's ugh. Eve, I've tried spinning. I'm always tempted by it. I love the idea of having a spinning wheel. I love the idea of the rhythm and the clicking of it. Uh, I'm an instant gratification girl. And I did some drop spindle. And the amount of time and the amount of effort that went into drop spindle before I got anything worthy was really tedious. I'm fascinated by the techniques. I love the science behind it. There's so much to learn. My boss, um, he's a really interesting guy in that anything that catches his eye, he will, whenever there's time, he will drop in and study or he'll learn about. About a month ago, he happened to go to the farmer's market and there was somebody there who was selling yarn and she had her wheel with her and she was spinning. And that caught his eye and he immediately started asking questions about that. And he had a couple questions from me about it, assuming that I spin my yarns. And I explained to him, no, I buy from a commercial base factory that, machine spins everything. And that the reason I don't is because I don't know anywhere near enough about it. I'm really just scratching the surface. And that there's so much to know about plying, about staple length, about different materials that you put in, about how much you're aerating it. And these are terms, these are things that I have caught only through watching podcasts such as Eve's, where she's talked about doing this. There's another podcast I talk about that they spin, and they talk about doing it with Rolags or bats. And I know that I know next to nothing about it. And other than answering questions about what I prefer to use, single plies, two plies, four plies for, I don't have good answers. I'm just ignorant to the whole thing. It's fascinating. I love it. I'm a little bit afraid about going down that rabbit hole because I already have so much stuff that I'm trying to juggle and do at once that the idea of adding some other wonderful shiny gem to my life scares me. I'm a little bit terrified about humidifiers in this house, just because I don't want to end up with pockets of mold, and that's about how I'm storing my stuff because I've got it stored in plastic. I agree. I could use a humidifier big time in this house. It is dry. The desert is so dry. Old English Sheepdog, has anybody spun dog hair? Interestingly enough, I actually have spun dog hair. I used to have a chow chow. Chow chows, like Old English Sheepdogs, are a fur-bearing animal. The difference with, so dogs come in a couple varieties. They come with hair, or they come with fur, or they come with wool. I have a terrier. She has a hair wool combination. She has hair that grows very, very long. She has an undercoat of wool that insulates her. Chow chows are a fur wool combination. They have a fur that grows to a certain stable length, and then underneath they have a wool that insulates them. You can comb that wool out, give it a wash, and you can spin it. The staple length, the length of the actual fibers, will vary from animal to animal. With my chow chow, I had a staple length of about 2 inches. It was just shy of 2 inches. And I was able to comb a little bit of that out and spin it. Incredibly warm. Dog hair is one of the warmest wools out there. The Chinese spun chow chow hair for the royals for centuries. If I could find a cheap secondhand wheel, that would make a huge difference in my decision not to go down that rabbit hole. I look at wheels and I don't know enough about them. I know that you need tensioners and that there's spindle. There's so much involved in it. My husband is very mechanical. I'm quite sure that he would be able to help me sort that sort of a thing out. Flywheels and tensioners, and again, terms that I've picked up watching other spinners talk about it. Nothing I know or understand. I regret, to a great degree, my local yarn store, which has since long closed. They had a large collection of wheels. They taught spinning in numerous classes on each of the wheels. They had a rental service where I could go and rent a wheel. I never did it. I never went down any of that. I was so busy teaching and designing at that time, I wasn't even dying yet. I wish I had done it. They also had a weaver's studio where they had a large number of looms, and they had looms for rent. Um, and I'm talking big floor looms where you showed up with your pickup truck and they would load a floor loom in and you would rent it. I regret that I did not do that as well. If you have opportunities in front of you, take them while you have them. They disappear. Evie, your dogs are terriers as well. You've got that small wool coat on them. Are you finding that the staple length is really short? Hi, thank you for joining. Oh, I'm glad you were able to pop in. Great. Anybody that's joining late, keep in mind that this is live now, but it will be a saved video later. So you'll be able to go back to the beginning and see everything that I've talked about from the beginning. I've talked about dyeing, notating my recipes. I've showed off yarns, talked about working with single plies. There's a number of topics in here. I don't think of collies as having wool. Probably because the only collies I ever experienced have been just brushed so fine that you never saw that. It's a strange thing to think about. I don't know why. Treat it like cotton. Okay, that makes sense to me. A Welsh sheepdog. Ah, that's very different. As for the cameo from the canines, my dogs are not allowed in my studio. They sneak in from time to time if I leave the door open. Generally, they know that as soon as the flooring changes, that's where they lay down and they can stare into the room mournfully, but that they don't come into the room. The reason for that is I do need to cater to people who have dog allergies. My yarn is in here, my yarn is in my kitchen. On top surfaces only, and when it's not there, it's hanging on the dryer rack. I'm very careful to make sure that it's not in the general doggy area. When my husband and I sit down, let's do that for you. When my husband and I sit down, he's wonderful about helping me. I pre-tie all the yarns before I dye them. I've shown you guys that as part of the preparation process, is that I put a cotton thread through and make sure that the skein is very organized, that I'm going to be able to get it back out neatly and organized, and that I've got a cotton thread in my acid dyes that will not take up the dye, so I can see that bright white thread and pull them out of my pots easily. When we sit down to tie the skeins, we will sit down and we'll do 40, 60 skeins at a time on the sofa, but we have a special sheet that we use that we lay down on top of us to make sure that there is no dog hair anywhere in there. That sheet, as soon as it's done, goes right into the laundry, gets folded up and bagged up again, just so that although I have a very canine friendly house and there is dog hair everywhere, it's not in the yarn. So they won't be visiting in here. I do try to post. I've had a lot of questions about my dogs, especially since people have seen my podcast where I talked about losing my dog, that I have a dog with lymphoma who is enjoying her last days as best we can. She's on a steroid right now. She has no idea there's anything wrong with her. She's running around like she's 3 years old. I have been trying to share more videos of my dogs on my Instagram feed. My puppy, he is, I think we did the math and figured out he's like 28 months now. He's full grown. He's hardly a puppy, but he loves to play with a basketball and he growls at it and death shakes it and throws it around and chases it. And he is hysterical to watch. I love watching him just go monkey on that thing. He's been good entertainment on my Instagram feed as well. Eve, thank you for all the resources. These are wonderful. Eve is posting all kinds of information about spinning cotton, about her dogs. This is wonderful. Oh, happy birthday to your puppy. One of the joys of dogs, one of the joys of having dogs in your life is that there are some breeds that are puppies every day of their lives. And having that kind of energy and that kind of enthusiasm in your life can be so satisfying, so fulfilling. It is worth it, even if that puppy behavior has a tendency to be overwhelming and exhausting. Uh, the My girl that I'm losing, she's a German short-haired pointer. She is just coming up on 8. She'll be 8, I think, in September, if I remember correctly. A little young to be dealing with this, but cancer does what cancer does. She was a very difficult puppy in that she is a worker and she didn't have a job. And so she took it upon herself to find jobs, which included eating every sprinkler head my husband has ever installed in our garden, after having broken into said garden and making sure that she dug up all the onions, all the carrots, and whatever else a lizard could have possibly uh, been anywhere near, because that's wholly entertaining to chase and acquire the lizards. Betty Ann, thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. They when an animal perceives pain or illness, all they know is today is good or today is bad. Um, they don't, to the best of my awareness and understanding, they don't look at their lives and go, I'm middle aged, I need a sports car, or whoa, I'm fat, I don't think I look my best. They don't contemplate things like we do. The hardest thing for us is to perceive whether or not they're communicating that today is a good day or a bad day. I had another German short hair pointer. He was a huge part of my life, and he unfortunately developed brain cancer. We were wholly unaware until it was pretty aggressive. The only behavior that we saw, other than a little bit of old man, was he got a little old man grouchy toward the end, and we didn't realize that it was because he was having headaches. Once my vet was able to diagnose the brain cancer, once we recognized that there was tumors in his head, and I recognized that he likely was suffering not only headaches but migraines, and knowing my experience with a migraine, I could not allow it. I could not do that to him, and made the hard decision to let my friend go, which is obviously still really hard. That was 4 years ago. I think I'm so sensitive to that because I know that he suffered. With Haley, my current GSP, who is sick with cancer, I do not see signs of suffering. I have talked at length with my vet. She likely has no idea and is happy with her good days. She is having all good days right now. And therefore, I don't have the sensitivity to it because I know that once I see the change, I can make that decision and there will not be suffering. Oh, that's right. I'm really behind on my podcasts. Um, I, huh, I have not been watching my podcast during my lunch break like I had been. And a lot of that is about some of the scheduling that's going on at work and about how short my lunch breaks have been. So sitting down and having 15 minutes to get sucked in and be all, yeah, only to have my timer go off and only be 10 minutes into a podcast. I opted to kind of set that aside for right now. And I'm going to have so much catching up to do. I can't wait. Um, Unfortunately, I have missed Scott and John's last two episodes, I think, which is saying something because they don't do them very often. Uh, I am very heartbroken to hear about Grady. That losing a member of your family is always difficult. Monica, hi. Speaking of work, Monica's here. Hi, Monica. I do want to see the baking episode. I Scott had talked about doing that for quite a while now, and I'm not sure what inspired him, why he was thinking about doing those to begin with. It's interesting. I'm tempted from time to time when I'm making a paleo dish to set stuff aside and think, oh, I could film this. And then I'm like, no, I just want to eat it now. I'm just going to cook it. Lemore, hello. Gosh, what time is it where you are? Oh, yeah, food is everything. It- Betty, I can't imagine Scott's mother being naggy. I just don't see that wonderful, wonderful woman as putting any kind of pressure on him at all. Oh, Lemore, why did I think that you were so far away? You're in Wisconsin. How close are you to La Crosse? I'm very curious. Um, or him, yeah, yeah. Betty, I have never heard Scott say a disparaging word about his mother ever. Never, never. He has never called her out for being an enabler or anything of the sort. So it is almost set in stone. We're really close. It's in hard pencil. We're headed for pen. I will be going back to La Crosse in September, and I'm very excited about that. It will be the third week of September. I will be doing a appearance at Unwound again this year. Very excited to go and visit the girls and visit La Crosse again. It's such a beautiful, beautiful area. Um, Between west of you. I'll be flying into Minneapolis. So maybe, Lamore, we can find a way to have a coffee or something. That would be wonderful. Because I will be flying into Minneapolis and I'll be driving over to La Crosse, which, if I am doing my mapping correctly, is to the southeast of Minneapolis. Nancy and Betty Ann, you two need to get together. Really, that is actually no. You should never, ever, ever get together because I am quite sure that there would be a lot to be said about me. um, Lamore, really, if I'm going to be up there, we will try to figure something out. My plan is to get in a day. I believe I'm trying to get in 2 days before I need to be at the shop, or I'll be staying 2 days after the shop. I will be flying, like I said, into Minneapolis, and I'll be renting a car. I usually do a hopper flight from Minneapolis into La Crosse. I will not be doing that this time, so I'm going to have a little bit more flexibility. I'm really hoping to explore the area more this time and get around to some other places. So when we get closer, you and I are going to sort out times and we're going to find a way to do that. That would be great. This particular trip up to La Crosse, I believe I'm going to be doing a dye class as well in the shop. I think that would be great fun. Uh, Preliminarily, we are talking about doing blanks and having people actually be able to dye their own blanks in the shop. Um, Again, it's preliminary. We're still knocking out the details. We're also looking again at doing another Meet the Dyer breakfast. Very excited about that. That was wonderful. Last year, we kind of joked about naming skeins. And that's one of those things that a lot of dyers really struggle with is naming their colorways. And I'm finding more and more often that a name will come before the color. There's a lot of fun phrases and names that will trigger color ideas. Um, for example, one of the owners of Unwound has a beautiful little girl. She just turned, I believe, 2. I'm pretty sure it was 2, about a month ago, and Claudia. And Claudia is so many things. I can't wait to go back to see her again. She is an adorable little toddler. She is very much in control of her world. She knows what she wants and when she wants it. Um, Very pretty child, but her favorite toy is a severed arm. She's got a personality on her. And her mother had posted a birthday photo and talked about how sweet and nice she was and how brutal she was with that left hook. And it immediately came to mind that Claudia is a badass. And somehow that is likely to be a colorway name. And her mother when I mentioned it, immediately jumped forward and said, yes, and it needs to be greens and grays, and I'm doing mother and daughter sweaters in that as soon as you have it dyed. So I'm finding that phrases and things come up and become colorways that they inspire those colorways and those connections. I would love to teach a dye shop in Maine, a dye workshop in Maine. That would be great fun. I just need to get that local dye shop on my Kool-Aid. I could just come to your house in Maine and teach you how to dye. That would probably save us all kinds of work. I'm sorry. I'm reading my comments and I'm reacting to them. Hopefully, if you're rewatching this, you're able to correlate them. I hope that they do stream in the same time. Um, I'm a little bit I live in a little bit of fear of Betty Ann and Nancy teaming up. I'm pretty sure that that would tear the time space continuum, as they have some very similar traits between the two of them. Um, each of them having been mums of some aggressive personalities and appreciating such. So some of the other names for colorways, things, phrases that have inspired colorways. Um, at this breakfast that we did, we had been joking, and there were a number of conversations happening around this large table. And in that whole process, I was speaking to somebody specifically about naming colorways who was sitting right by me. And there was another couple conversations going on. And I heard the words rubber ducky and I heard the words seance. I do not know what drove those conversations. I don't know what that happened. But I said, there's the name for a colorway that will inspire colors that will be memorable. And thusly, Rubber Ducky Seance came into existence. It is a smoky gray and black that has a bright yellow, rubber ducky yellow in it, with speckles of a orange for its bill. Uh, it is a dynamic and interesting yarn, but that's not what sells it. The name sells it. People take one look at Rubber Ducky Seance and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's interesting," and they take that up. Oh, mm, the secret is broken. Yes, my mother is here with us today. uh, as well as my sister. Did anybody pick up on that? Which one of you is my sister? Yay, the sister's been exposed. Oh, my mother and my sister are both knitters. Eh, Mom taught me, and that, as you can tell, has opened up an entire world for me. And she taught me young. I believe I was 7 when I started knitting. I did crochet for years. It was a little bit more in my skill range at that age because I was only having to manipulate one needle. But ultimately, crochet just isn't for me. I really was a knitter from the beginning. There was so much magic to watch her sit and make a sweater with these needles and this thread, and the calm that came over her. That was something I wanted. And I try very hard on my lunch breaks at the hospital to be in the lobby when I'm knitting, to kind of impart that atmosphere to people that are sitting there anxious and nervous and waiting for loved ones to come out of surgery or out of the ER. And certainly to give exposure to the young kids that are bored, senseless, and running around. And I often have an audience. I often have children come over and ask me what I'm doing. I think it's so important. I know that it was good for my heart, it was good for my mind, it has been good for my well being and my life. Everybody should know. Yes, Charlotte, you're welcome to be my older European sister, and thank you for being here. Thank you for all of your help. Oh no! Now wait a minute, Eve. I that not so sure we need to share the embarrassing story. Actually, I think I usually dump my embarrassment right out there with you. Did I tell you all that I had burnt my hair off making brownies? Yeah, mom and sister weren't witness to that, but I don't have any problem airing my own embarrassment. Knitting can be so calming, and it is so fascinating and so stressful that people uh, so stress relieving rather, that people connect immediately into the rhythm and the smooth of it, and it takes that stress right away. How did I burn my hair? Um, so there is a chunk, and you can see it right there. You see, well, it gets kind of short right there, despite it being kind of long there. Um, thank you, Monica. Uh, so I was making brownies, and very fortunately, I had showered when I got home before I decided to make these brownies and mix them up. And there comes that point when you're baking brownies where you pull them out and you put the stick in to make sure that they're cooked through enough and that they're not too gummy. I reached in, I pulled the pan out. I had done the stick test. I determined they needed a couple more minutes. And I had not pulled the drawer out. I had reached in and I had taken the pan of brownies out. Pull your trays forward, utilize that sliding ability. It's there for a reason. When I reached back in, I went too far in and I actually singed my hair on the top heat element. Fortunately, I was baking. It was not the active heat element. The active heat element when you're baking is the bottom one. When you're broiling, it's the top one. And it still was at 325, and hair doesn't like that temperature very much. So as I pulled my head back out of my oven, I went, what is that smell? Oh no. And by that point, I could feel it hitting my forehead and burning me there as well. Had I not showered and still had product in my hair, it's likely that I would have a much more significant area of hair loss. Um, yes, my cover story is that I was actually making sweets for the children in the neighborhood in preparation for the summer solstice. And if those little brats hadn't pushed me into my own oven, I never would have suffered these burns. Good pagan folklore there. Because the truth is ever so much more embarrassing, and you should always, yeah, throw yourself on the fire. That is very much Hansel and Gretel. Absolutely, those neighborhood heathens, man, they're awful. Oh, I love the community that builds out of doing this. It's so wonderful when people are able to connect and see where they've crossed paths in their lives before. The knitting community is so generous and so connected. What a fabulously supportive community it can be. Did anybody have any other knitting questions now that I'm all done embarrassing myself? Sorry, I'm checking my live feed. There's so many notes coming by. It has a tendency to jump and scroll for me, so it's not always easy for me to catch you guys on the fly, especially if I'm running my mouth. What is my favorite project? Oh, um, at the moment, or in general, what's my favorite project to work? I love working socks. Socks are infinitely practical. Of course, everybody needs a pair of socks. My body temperature runs really cold anyway, so it's very important to me to have really warm elements. I hate being cold. Socks are, in addition to being infinitely useful, they're a fun playground because you can have wild colors, you can have wild patterns, um, and you can use them as kind of a test for designs. If I've developed a new stitch, if I've developed a new lace, this gives me a playground to apply that stitch in that's not huge. It's not overwhelming. I'm not making an 80-hour commitment. I'm making an 8-hour commitment. A sock can be done generally depending on how intricate the lace is. I can knock a sock out in about 8 hours of labor. Um, the other beauty of a sock is it has segments. You've got all these different areas that have different instructions. And just about the time that you tire of it, you're changing and you're doing something else. So it keeps my interest. The other thing is that they're really portable. Um, um, they're very portable, so I can have them in the car with me. I can have them at my lunch break with me. They're not heavy. It's not something that I'm weighing myself down with a heavy bag with, yeah, cutting in and causing more shoulder problems. We don't need to go there. Um, they're just really easy and fun. They can provide challenge, they can provide a soothing environment, they can provide so many other tools that I apply and I use, whether I'm looking at how the yarn interacts, whether my, what did I do with it? It's here somewhere. Whether I am looking at how the sock blank lays out in the stitch and seeing how the colors interact, or I'm looking at with more of a striped or a more variegated pattern, how it's going to lay out. It gives me more information about the yarn and how to pair yarns with projects. Um, it's a great tool. It's a great tool. They're easy, they're fun, they're practical. Um, Always the next idea or design. Absolutely. My favorite project is always that shiny thing. The two color farmhouse shawl was great fun. I enjoyed doing it. I love it. I can't believe I let it camp so long before I really put it into hard development. The three color shawl doesn't offer me the same challenge. It's basically done. All I have to do is some math to sort out how I'm incorporating the other colors and how I'm extending it. So, and gloriously, thank you. I have a sample knitter for that one. So as soon as I have my math set out and I have that pattern out, I'm sending the yarn to somebody else who's going to knit it for me. Because it's not shiny, because it's not a challenge, my interest in it has waned. And that's not to say that I don't love the project, that it's not going to be fantastic. It's simply that it's not catching my eye. What's catching my eye is I sat down and I did some doodling, and I'm curious to see how it's going to pan out, if it's going to uh, be a viable design, if it's going to have the interest that I think it's going to have, if it's going to interact with the yarn pairings that I have in mind so that it can provide a bigger playground for us all. So yeah, it's really about chasing the shiny thing. That having been said, although I have that shawl cast on and I'm playing with it and I'm working on the 3-color shawl, I cast on another pair of socks the other day. And they are my travel socks. They are in my car. They are going with me. They are what I'm knitting. It is a commercially produced self-patterning sock. It is mindless. It is something to soothe my soul when I'm going in horrible traffic, and it's soothing my soul when I'm on break at work and I just need to get whatever toxic phone call just yelled in my ear back out. Canning is fun. Thank you, Monica, for asking about that. Uh, Although this is a knitting and dyeing podcast, my other interests do fall over. I do talk about many other things. Canning is something that my husband and I pretty aggressively do every year, whether we're canning green beans, which you're going to start seeing a lot of green beans at work. I will probably eat green beans every day for the next 3 months. Um, or it's our carrots that we put up. We also make salsa every year. We are to that end very much Southwest in that we love our salsa. We make salsa by the gallons. It's usually a good 2 days of 10, 12-hour labor, but it's also because of how much we produce. We produce so much. We've had years that we did spaghetti sauce as well, where it was really just more of a tomato sauce, but we put up, 2.5 gallons of it in pint and quart jars. It's encompassing, it's huge, it's oh, long days, but it becomes a well-oiled machine. It's a dance in our kitchen where we each have duties and we each are good at certain aspects of the preparation and the making of it, and we do it. Oh, Linda, you shouldn't have taken your message back. I would have loved to have seen that. I have that problem with socks. A few repeats, I lose interest. You know what? I get that. Especially if it's a boring stitch pattern. That's part of why I love to do socks, because if I am bored with my stitch, that means my knitters are going to be bored with that stitch, and it means I need to revisit that design. Ultimately, when I'm designing something, the flow of it needs to be fun. If I'm not enjoying my process, if I'm not enjoying the project that I am sample knitting for you guys, it will get scrapped. I have tossed more designs that I just did not enjoy working rather than producing the pattern and putting something out there that wasn't fun to produce. Ah, don't worry about rude. Rude and honest are the same thing. Oh, green chilies, right? Monica, I will try to make sure that I bring a pint of salsa in for you. Are you a hot or a mild girl? John makes toxic hot salsa. Even stuff that Liz has been kind of like, that's a little hot. And Liz, she likes her salsa hot. Debbie, hello. Thank you for popping in and commenting. I proudly knit acrylic. And there should not be any shame in your choices. It is you, it is your project, it is your choice. And if it makes you happy, who in God's green earth has any right to say anything different? No one. Um, I knit initially with acrylic, and a number of my early designs are written for acrylic because I had an allergy to a wool, to alpaca, but I thought it was wool, and straight up had to avoid the product. I was not aware how much alpaca was spun into wool. I have to be very careful with my supplies that I make sure that none of my bases have an alpaca in it. Which is limiting. There are beautiful, beautiful bases out there that I can't and won't use. Um, so there are yarn snobs out there who would say, "Oh, she doesn't put acrylic, she doesn't put alpaca in her yarns. They're not warm, or they're not soft, or oh, they're inexpensive wools." Say what you will. Call it whatever you want, have whatever opinion you want. You are welcome to your opinion. However, if I choose to use that and I love it, it's none of your business. Um, feel free to ask me about acrylics. Feel free to comment about acrylics. I have an acrylic sweater on the needles that desperately needs to be revisited. I know I need to put a couple more rounds on it before I can divide out for the sleeves. I need to get on that because that is going to be my kick around after work sweater this winter. So I best get plugging. I know it's only July, but those months go by quick, especially when, oh, look, shiny. I have a pair of acrylic socks on the needles. I cast them on toe up. I think I'm at the point where I do a reverse French heel when I do toe up socks, which is a heel flap heel. I think I'm at the point where I need to start my gusset, and that requires a little bit more concentration to sort out my length before I proceed with those socks. So I haven't been carrying them with me. Top down socks, I know exactly where to start my gusset. It's right after I do my heel flap. So I toe up requires just a little bit more concentration for me at the stage that I'm at, so I haven't progressed with those. Um, just how many whips do I have? Just how many whips do I have? Well, so I don't have my list. I did my yarn, my parade, my project parade, and I sorted out what whips I had, what projects I had. Anybody looking at this and going, "What the devil is a whip?" Works in progress, WIP, whip. Um, Currently, I have my Dayland sweater. I have my Venetian Dream sweater. I have toe up acrylic. I have top down wool socks. I have the shawl that's on the needles there. I have one of those missing shawls, one of the missing projects that I've talked about. I located, so I did find that one. I have my How to Eat an Elephant blanket. Um, I think I currently am working with 7. It's quite possible that there's more. I think 7. I dare say under 10. I have under 10 whips currently in process. Um, it keeps me interested. Oh, I also have the scarf up there. Um, it keeps me interested. I like to cycle around through them. If they're stalled, it's because I have generally come across an issue either with the pattern or with something that I've done in it, and I know that it requires time and focus for me to sit down and get over that bump. Um, are you sure we are sisters? Why? Because I have so much going on at once? No. Uh, Charity knitting. Thank you, Lamore, for making that statement. Um, Charity knitting does need to be easy to wash. It, of course, it's very difficult to knit something that's going to cost $300 in yarn and give it to charity. We try to give as much as we can always, and sometimes something that costs $15 that we can produce 20 of versus something that costs $300 that I can produce 1 of. We want our charity to spread out as much as possible. The most important part of charity knitting is that it needs to be hypoallergenic. Not only does it need to be easy to wash, but it needs to be something that everybody has access to, that everybody can use. And like I said, I avoided wool actively because if it had alpaca in it, I blistered. Um, it's it's so important that it, like I said, that everybody has access and that we can spread our charity as far and as wide as we can. Um, Superwash is absolutely lovely, but again, if allergies are at play, it becomes an issue. Um, my personal preference for my knitting, I love super washes because I love how the color adheres to that base. It is bright and vibrant, whereas with a straight non-superwash wool, it has a tendency to be softer and more pastel, no matter how rich or engaged that color is. With acrylic, that color is a punch. It's a pop of color. It is like Crayola crayons. And because it is that acrylic plastic content, it does not fade. It does not wash out. Um, it's about the right material for the right project and for the right use. I have not done a Flegel heel. I'm not familiar with the Flegel heel. I've heard the term before, but I'm not sure how that is done. That's one of those things that's on my wish list to go and research. Don't you love when you have too many options, Leanne, when you can have to sit there and sort out between 3, 4, 8 different things? That is the problem with Ravelry. That is a total time suck because you go in there looking for patterns and you come out with 20 and you can't decide between them. Monica, thank you so much for joining me. You go get your deals and your coupons. You are a master of that. I love following your Instagram and seeing what $2 will buy. I'm just fascinated. Thank you for joining me, and I will try to get you some salsa. That's the rabbit hole, Rachel. Um, I, I you always want to know what the next one is, and you get excited about that next one. I do not have your fortitude to march through and finish the first project before I'm on to the next one. And part of it is that my knitting time is so broken up. I have sections of time where I can really sit down and focus, and I have other sections of time that are really short, and I need something easy that I'm not having to look at the pattern for, especially if I'm in the car and we're doing our commute knitting. Just knitting it around is nice and easy for me there versus what is the next stitch in this lace? What is the next row? Do I have to memorize an entire line of instruction? Whereas at home, I can sit down and I can work on an entire line of instruction. So I'm always swapping projects out. Environmental impacts of acrylic and superwash. I'm always concerned about the environment to a horrible degree. My son told me that he was interested in becoming a chemical engineer at one point, and I got off the phone and all but sobbed because I raised him better than that. I don't want more chemicals in my world, which is kind of myopic because chemicals are good ultimately. Acrylic, the impact with acrylic is, of course, that we have things that don't degrade. Um, and of course, chemicals that are involved in it. It is ultimately a petroleum product. Um, Petroleum products, of course, are acrylic is very refined. It does put a lot of junk into our air. There are greater sins. Superwash is, if I remember correctly, a chlorinated gas product. I'm trying to remember what the chemical is that is kind of gas baked onto the fiber. If I'm remembering correctly, I know that it's an outer process after it's been spun. It also has negative impact. That one's negative impact is more groundwater based and gaseous based, if I remember correctly. They're horrible things. There are horrible chemicals. Everything in our life has a teeter totter. There is a pro and a con to everything. And when I look at the overall impact, I can name 12 things that are worse. I can name 12 things that are better. But my response, the reason that I hesitate is because I have a sense of guilt. I have a public need to say I'm against chemicals. I don't want to harm my environment. I always want what's best, and what ultimately is best is that we have sheared the sheep from sheared the sheep and spun the wool that's been gently washed, and we have a natural fiber. However, there is that selfish person in me that says um, that the convenience and the longevity that we get from superwash is worth its cost. That the joy that I get from these fibers, whether they are superwash or acrylic, is worth its cost. Then there's the other side of the teeter totter that goes, you have children. Someday you're going to have grandchildren. And what's long term impact on the environment? I guiltily report that I don't know. I don't know what the long term impact is. I am very well aware that we have a plastic ocean, that we have islands in our ocean full of just plastic and refuse and waste. I have guilt about that. I have reduced my household waste as far down as I can get. Literally, if I have half a bag of trash a week, it's shocking. I feel worse about the bag that I put my trash in than what's in my bag. I recycle at every opportunity. So to alleviate my own guilt, my own enjoyment of the environmental impact that I make by producing this stuff, by buying this stuff, I've made cuts in other areas. Um, it concerns me. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm guilty enough to admit that I am selfish enough that I will use these products despite their impact. Um, that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing. My chat just popped up again, so I'm just catching up again with you guys. I will look for happy knits. I'm interested in that Flegel heel and would like to learn that. I'm always looking at new heels. The pair that I cast on the other day is a top down on purpose. I was gifted a replacement needle for that long circular, and I want to make another pair of the Squircle socks in honor of that. Eve, do not apologize for asking that question. I think that it is important to have that um, discussion. I think that airing the discussion, I think that admitting that I'm selfish, admitting that there is an impact is important. Otherwise, when we stop admitting that we do things that are not good for ourselves or our environment, we put the blinders on, and that's when illness and disease and sickness happens. Whereas if we are aware and open about it, then we can discuss change, and we can discuss improvement, and we can discuss avoidance, and we can discuss other things that we can do to impact and counter that impact. Uh, don't apologize for it. My guilt is my own. That is my choice. Um, the other important thing to keep in mind about the word guilt is the emotion you feel when you have concern about how other people will perceive you. Um, it is a secondary emotion. It is about judgment. And it's a good thing in my book to feel guilt because it means you're actively considering the impact of others and how you're impacting others. Not all not all bad emotions are bad. Keeping that eye on the ball, keeping your awareness high is important. Rachel, I could not do just one project at a time. I would snap. I would. I don't know how people do just one project at a time. I I think that when I'm focused wholly on working with just one project, that the temptation of other projects gets turned way up, and I'm less likely to focus on it, and I'm more likely to begrudge it. That's me. That's just how I do it. Um, I yeah, I think like you said, I really have to focus. I have to put the blinders on when I have a project that I need to get done. Like when I was working on the shawl, I didn't have a problem focusing on that. And other than a few stray rounds on a sock, that's all I did, because that's where my focus was. I think my focus is so often on so many other things that it makes it easier for me to jump from project to project. Single skein shawls, aren't those just delightful? They're romantic. They're so easy to pick up and to enjoy. And it's like a single serving. It's like a pint of ice cream. It's all yours, and you get to enjoy every bite of it. Recycling is a difficult topic. So ultimately, I believe in recycling. I like to reuse things. I like the idea that things that I use are being reused. We have had issue locally where we were told things were being recycled. We divided things out. We had things being picked up by a second service, only to discover that it was being dumped in the same landfill. We had a glass recycling project here, and we believed wholeheartedly that this glass was being taken out of state and was going to a refinery and being melted down and made into other glass products, only to discover that the company had basically lied to the city and the state and had dug a giant hole out in the desert and was dumping it all out in the desert and taking our money. Um, that's frustrating. It's heartbreaking, and it's hard to continue to make the effort to separate your stuff out and to drive it to where it needs to go, or to have it picked up, or to have faith in the process when you know you've been lied to. It's, I get it. Oh, Debbie, don't let me feel guilty. Don't let me make you feel guilty. Please don't. Um, like I said, I make an effort. That's my choice. I will never pressure anyone about any of their choices. And what works in your life is what works in your life. I, E- Eve, you're funny. Oh, that is an interesting typo. um, so I'm going to skip over your typo. I find that very amusing. If anybody else has a chuckle there, have at. Uh, the bow truckle. You were loving that. I hope you continue to love that. I hope that's set aside because you found something shiny elsewhere. And certainly, if you find anything wrong with the bow truckle, please let me know so I can make edits and get that back out to everyone. I appreciate the work you did on that for me. Guys, we're rounding up on 2 hours and 20 minutes. And as much as I have absolutely loved sitting here and doing this with you, that is a big, big episode that's going to take days to compress and get up for everybody else, as well as a really long segment for anyone to sit down and watch. Um, I love you guys, and I am so grateful that every one of you joined me. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for interacting with each other. Thank you for making this a special time for me. And I'm going to sign off. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. I hope everybody has a safe and fun 4th, even though it lands dead in the middle of the week. And lunch sounds fabulous. Absolutely. Love you guys. Thank you for joining, and I will see you all next weekend. Next weekend is going to be the drawing for the Patreon prizes, and yarn goes out to you guys. Save up your questions, email me your questions, and the next one of these is going to be July 13th, I think. I will make sure that I add it to the notes when this is all closed up below. But certainly it's also listed in the last podcast, and I'll announce it in the next podcast. That one will be a midweek. Thank you, Nancy. That's the 11th. It will be a midweek one in the evening. It will be difficult for Europe. But for most of America, it won't be horrible, I hope. Happy Canada Day tomorrow. Yes, thank you. Honor to my northern neighbors. And Eve, I will get that right out to you. Good call, Rachel. Bye, everyone. Have a great time. I'll see you later.